Imagine a medieval European sports league where the fatality rate was just so astronomically high that the government actually had to step in.
Right. And they didn't step in because of, standard sports injuries like a pulled hamstring or something.
Exactly. They
Wow.
stepped in because players were willingly strapping heavy iron cauldrons to their heads and deliberately trying to catch falling meteorites.
Which is just, it's completely wild to wrap your head around.
It really is. So today we are doing a deep dive into the hyper-violent, heavily classified, and honestly deeply bizarre evolution of the wizarding world's absolute favorite pastime.
And we are pulling all our insights today from what is definitely the definitive historical text on the subject. That is Quidditch Through the Ages by Kenilworthy Wisp.
Yeah, and Wisp's archival work is just unparalleled. He really digs into it.
Oh, absolutely. He doesn't just present the modern rulebook.
Yeah.
He exhumes the absolute chaos of the centuries that preceded it. But before we even touch the history of the sport itself, we really have to look at the physical artifact we are examining today because it tells a story all its own.
It totally does. For those listening, we are working from a reproduction of an actual Hogwarts school library copy.
Yeah, and the detail that immediately grounds this text is the original checkout card glued right to the front page.
I honestly spent a good 20 minutes just staring at that checkout card.
It's fascinating, right?
It really is. I mean, for anyone familiar with recent wizarding history, it is just a staggering who's who. Like, the first name you see is O. Wood.
Oliver Wood.
Right, the notoriously obsessive Gryffindor captain. I mean, you can easily picture him checking this out for, like, the 50th time at 2 in the morning to devise some grueling new practice routine.
Oh, for sure. He probably had it memorized.
Yeah. And then you've got C. Diggory, A. Johnson, but then right at the bottom, there's this really fascinating sequence of signatures.
The trio of names at the end.
Exactly. You have F. Weasley, followed by H. Granger, and then H. Potter.
It's basically a cross-section of an entire cultural era at Hogwarts.
Yeah, you have the dedicated athletes looking for strategic advantages, obviously.
Right, but the inclusion of Hermione Granger is what I find the most compelling there.
Oh, 100%.
Because we know she notoriously prefers the quiet of the library to, the roaring stands of the pitch.
She is not a sports person.
Not at all. So her checking this book out suggests she was likely trying to apply academic rigor to understand the athletic obsession of her two best friends.
That makes total sense, like she's studying the game to understand them.
Exactly. It really demonstrates how deeply this game permeates every single level of magical culture, It demands attention even from its most reluctant observers.
It really does. And the physical book itself comes with a warning that perfectly foreshadows the violence we are about to explore in the history.
Oh, Madam Pince's warning. It's legendary.
It is not a standard Muggle please return on timestamp. This is a severe, highly specific threat from a Hogwarts librarian. Listen to the sheer aggression in these verbs.
I love this part.
She writes, if you rip, tear, shred, bend, fold, deface, disfigure, smear, smudge, throw, drop, or in any other manner damage, mistreat, or show lack of respect towards this book.
She really covers every single base there.
Right. There is no loophole. And she finishes it with, the consequences will be as awful as it is within my power to make them.
Which, considering her reputation, as awful as it is within my power, is a terrifying metric.
It really is.
It's a beautifully aggressive way to open a text about a remarkably aggressive game. But, her ferocity also highlights why the existence of this specific Muggle-accessible edition is kind of a minor miracle.
Because she vehemently did not want this book crossing the magical boundary.
Not at all. The foreword, which is written by Albus Dumbledore, explains that he had to personally intervene to pry this book from the library for duplication.
He had to physically take it from her.
Yeah. He orchestrated this unprecedented release for the benefit of Comic Relief UK, which is a Muggle charity. And he notes that the charity has raised over $250 million. And for the wizarding audience, he actually provides this staggering currency conversion.
It's over 34 million galleons.
34 million.
Just you listening right now, try to wrap your head around the economics of that. We know that a single wand costs about 7 galleons.
Right.
That amount of money represents a tectonic shift in resources. And Dumbledore mentions that Madame Pince was so horrified at handing over a magical text to the non-magical world that she suggested telling the charity the library had burned down.
Or pretending she had dropped dead.
Yes, he literally had to detach her fingers individually from the spine of the book.
Which really underscores a massive sociocultural reality, right? Like the immense, deeply ingrained protective instinct the magical community harbors regarding their culture.
Because for centuries, their survival literally descended on absolute secrecy.
Exactly. So Dumbledore's choice to share this specific book, which details their most beloved, culturally unifying pastime, it's a profound gesture of cross-cultural goodwill.
Even though he does admit that while he removed the standard library jinxes, the book might still beat you about the head if you mistreat it.
Yeah, little residual magic there.
So think about what we are doing here today. For you listening, imagine finding the original, chaotic, completely unregulated scribbles of the very first rules of soccer or baseball.
Right, back when the pitch was just an entire village and the ball was a heavy stone.
Exactly. And half the players ended up with broken femurs. Except here, you have literal explosions, flying iron boulders, and players suspended hundreds of feet in the air.
It's a completely different level of danger.
So to understand how we arrived at the highly regulated, stadium-filling modern sport, we have to start with a foundational mechanical question.
The big why.
Right. Before you can have an airborne sport, you need a way to fly. Why on earth did an entire civilization of magic users look at all their options and decide to take to the skies on their household cleaning supplies?
It is the essential mechanical question, isn't it? To answer it, we really have to examine the historical reality prior to the International Statute of Wizarding Secrecy in 1692.
When muggles and wizards were a lot closer.
Exactly. They were living in much closer, highly fraught proximity. Levitation spells at the time were rudimentary. They could only lift a person a few feet and couldn't sustain long-distance travel at all.
So they couldn't just fly without a tool.
Right. Magical practitioners needed a way to travel and experience flight, but they desperately needed a method that wouldn't immediately trigger a witch hunt if a muggle neighbor walked in unannounced.
Because if you're a wizard in the 11th century and the local blacksmith comes over to borrow some ale and he sees a flying armchair hovering in your living room.
You are going to be burned at the stake by sunset.
Exactly. It's game over.
Precisely. So the broomstick was born purely out of the necessity of camouflage. It was the ultimate compromise between magical ambition and basic survival.
Because every single household, muggle or magical, had a broom leaning in the corner.
Yeah. It was portable, it was inexpensive, and it was entirely invisible in its mundanity. Wisp actually draws a brilliant contrast here with the East, where the flying carpet became the preferred mode of transport.
Right, carpets are so much more comfortable.
Oh, completely. They are luxurious, you can fit an entire family on one, you can recline, you can carry luggage. But in the West, the overriding priority was strict, unyielding discretion.
But let's talk about the physical toll of that discretion, because Wisp does not sugarcoat how agonizing those early flights were.
Not at all.
I mean, if you're picturing a sleek, perfectly balanced Nimbus 2000, you need to banish that from your mind entirely.
We're talking about raw, unvarnished wood. The earliest records show broom flight around AD 962.
Right.
There's a German illuminated manuscript from that era that depicts 3 warlocks dismounting, and Wisp notes they have expressions of, quote, exquisite discomfort.
Exquisite discomfort is just such a wonderfully polite academic way to say in absolute blinding agony.
It really is.
Wisp includes a primary source from Guthrie Loughran, who was a Scottish wizard writing in 1107, and he documented his physical state after a short flight.
Oh, this quote is rough.
It is. I'm quoting directly here, so listeners prepare yourselves. He suffered, quote, splinter-field buttocks and bulging piles.
Yeah. A vivid, wince-inducing historical record.
Seriously.
Wisp actually describes a preserved medieval broomstick that's kept in the Museum of Quidditch. It features a thick, knotty handle made of ash with hazel twigs just crudely bound to one end.
So zero aerodynamics.
Zero. Furthermore, the enchantment on it was incredibly basic. It moved forward at a single, unalterable speed. It went up, it went down, and it stopped.
That's it.
That's it. No turning, no speeding up.
So you were straddling a vibrating, knotty piece of firewood, getting pelted by freezing rain, unable to turn gracefully, completely unable to adjust your speed. And you're enduring all of this solely so the muggle next door doesn't get suspicious.
It drastically reframes the sheer dedication early wizards had to being airborne, doesn't it?
It really does. But human nature is inherently competitive. The absolute moment they figured out how to make these agony sticks turn corners and vary their speed, they didn't just use them to visit their relatives.
No, of course not. They started inventing sports.
Exactly. which kicks off an era of ancient broom games that I personally like to call the era of fatalities.
The fatality rates were indeed staggering. These early games were intensely regional, largely unregulated, and seemingly designed to test the absolute limits of human endurance.
Let's survey this terrifying landscape, because Wisp begins with the 10th century Swedish broom race from Kopparberg to Archeplog.
Right, which is a little over 300 miles.
A grueling endurance race, certainly, but the route runs straight through a dragon reservation.
Specifically, the territory of the Swedish short snout.
Yeah.
And the crazy thing is, the annual event still takes place today.
Which is madness.
Wisp notes that modern wizards congregate at the starting line to cheer, and then they apparate, meaning they teleport to the finish line to, as he dryly puts it, congratulate the survivors.
Yeah, the word survivors is doing incredible heavy lifting there.
Absolutely.
But if dodging a fire-breathing apex predator wasn't enough, consider Germany in 1105. They invented a game called Stick Stock.
Stick stock. This feels like an airborne gladiatorial carnival game.
It really does. How did this one work?
Well, stick stock is historically significant
Oh.
because it introduces the concept of a stationary target defended by a dedicated player. They erected a 20-foot pole topped with an inflated dragon bladder.
Okay.
One player, who is designated the bladder guardian, was tied to the pole by a rope around their waist, which restricted their flight to a 10-foot radius.
Right.
The attackers would then zoom at the bladder, attempting to puncture it with specially sharpened broom handles.
Just picture the absolute mayhem of that. You have people flying at top speed on splintery wood trying to stab a balloon, while a guy tethered to a pole is legally permitted to use his wand to repel them.
It's pure chaos. The game ends when the bladder pops, when the Guardian successfully hexes every single attacker out of the sky, or when the Guardian simply collapses from physical exhaustion.
It was a brutal game of attrition.
It eventually died out in the 14th century, likely because the role of the Bladder Guardian was just too physically demanding,
Yeah.
or perhaps the strategic scope was just too limited.
Yeah, that makes sense. Then over in Ireland, they played Aingine. This game utilized a dom, which was the ball, but it wasn't a crafted leather ball.
No, it was an actual goat's gallbladder.
Which is so gross.
A rather visceral choice of sporting equipment by modern standards, but highly accessible in an agrarian society.
True. So you take this goat gallbladder, and you have to speed through a series of burning barrels set high up in the air on stilts.
Right.
You have to throw the dom through the final barrel in the fastest time without catching yourself on fire. It's an extreme airborne obstacle course.
Very extreme.
But honestly, flying through fire pales in comparison to the utter madness happening in Scotland. Listeners, brace yourselves for Creothere.
Creothation, 11th century Scotland.
Yeah.
This is arguably the most hazardous, ill-conceived sport ever formalized by wizard kind.
Wisp includes a translation of a tragic Gaelic poem about the game. The very first verse ends with the line, "At the sound of the horn they were swiftly airborne." But 10 of their number were fated to die.
10.
10 in one single game. And when you look at the mechanics of the game, you immediately understand why the mortality rate was so catastrophic.
The premise completely defies logic. Players literally strapped an iron cauldron to their heads. At the sound of the horn, up to 100 heavily charmed rocks and boulders, which had been hovering 100 feet in the air, were released to plummet toward the earth.
Just falling like meteors.
Exactly. The players zoomed around, attempting to catch as many falling boulders in their head cauldrons as possible.
Let's just stop and process this. They strapped heavy iron pots to their skulls, flew underneath 100 falling rocks, and tried to catch them with their necks.
Yeah.
How did anyone survive long enough to procreate, let alone invent a safer game? Was this just the ultimate fatal test of medieval machismo?
That is exactly what it was. Wisp explicitly documents that Creothere was considered by Scottish wizards to be the supreme test of manliness and courage.
Wow.
They strongly associated severe physical jeopardy with honor. The danger wasn't a byproduct of the sport, the danger was the sport.
It's the wizarding equivalent of standing on a busy highway to prove you're tough, except the cars are falling vertically from the clouds.
Precisely. And Wisp notes that despite the immense death toll, it took until 1762 for the ministry to finally make the game illegal.
1762.
Yeah, and incredibly, in the 1960s, a wizard named Magnus Denhead MacDonald petitioned to get the ban lifted.
Denthead MacDonald. I cannot fathom how he earned that nickname.
It's a mystery, truly, but it highlights a deeply ingrained generational resistance to safety regulations within certain factions of the magical community.
I guess so. But while Creathsworsens was busy killing off the Scottish population, the English games were slightly more restrained, right?
Slightly, yes. There was shunt bumps in Devon, which was essentially airborne jousting. The sole goal was to physically ram opponents off their brooms.
Still dangerous, but no boulders.
Right, and Swivenhodge in Herefordshire, where players sat backward on their brooms and batted an inflated pig's bladder over a hedge using the brush end of the broom,
Airborne backward tennis.
basically.
But here's the crux of the history. None of these extreme sports survived in a major way. They were either too deadly, like Creathsworsens, or too simplistic, like Swivenhodge.
Right.
But one obscure, highly localized game played over a soggy marsh managed to combine exactly the right evolutionary traits. It had ball handling, it had goal scoring, and it had just enough physical danger to keep the adrenaline pumping.
And the primary historical documentation of this game's genesis is absolutely brilliant. We owe our knowledge of the foundations of Quidditch entirely to the 11th century diary of a witch named Gertie Kettle.
Her diary is preserved in the Museum of Quidditch, right?
It is.
What I love about this is that Gertie Kettle is not an avid sports fan. She's not a chronicler of athletic achievement.
No, not at all.
She is just a deeply irritated neighbor who just wants to tend her cabbage patch in peace.
She is the quintessential hostile witness. Her diary entries, which are translated from badly spelled Saxon, provide a day-by-day account of the game's evolution, viewed entirely through a lens of utter contempt.
It's so funny.
Listen to her first entry titled Tuesday. Hot, she writes. That lot from across the marsh have been at it again, playing a stupid game on their broomsticks. A big leather ball landed in my cabbages. I hexed the man who came for it. I'd like to see him fly with his knees on back to front, the great hairy hog.
She hexed his knees backward, but she casually drops a massive piece of historical data here, right? The ball is made of leather.
Exactly. Unlike the inflated bladders used in stickstock or Swivenhodge, a leather ball is essential here.
Because of the weight.
Yes, an inflated bladder is too light. It would be wildly inaccurate to throw, especially in the windy, unpredictable conditions of a marsh. This heavy leather ball is the undeniable ancestor of the modern quaffle.
Then we move to her next entry. Tuesday, wet, she writes. Was out on the marsh picking nettles, broomstick idiots playing again. Watched for a bit from behind a rock. They've got a new ball. Throwing it to each other and trying to stick it in trees at either end of the marsh. Pointless rubbish.
Notice the tactical evolution there. They are no longer just aimlessly tossing a ball, they are executing purposeful passing.
Right, teamwork.
And crucially, they are trying to stick it in trees at either end.
Yeah.
This is the first recorded instance of territorial goal scoring in a broom game.
That's huge.
It is. It shifts the activity from a casual game of catch to a structured contest with a definitive offensive and defensive objective.
But the third entry, Tuesday, Wendy, is where the game truly turns lethal.
Oh.
She writes, Gwenog came for nettle tea, then invited me out for a treat. Ended up watching those numbskulls playing their game on the marsh. That big Scottish warlock from up the hill was there. Now they've got two big, heavy rocks flying around trying to knock them all off their brooms. Unfortunately, didn't happen while I was watching. Went home in disgust.
The introduction of two big heavy rocks flying around. This is the critical moment of synthesis. These are the forerunners of the bludgers.
Wow.
And Wisp raises a vital historical hypothesis here. He notes the specific presence of the big Scottish warlock. Could this warlock have been a Creedoshan player?
I mean, it makes complete sense. You have a guy whose idea of a good time is strapping a cauldron to his head and dodging boulders.
Right.
He watches these local numbskulls tossing a leather ball into some trees and thinks, you know what? This is incredibly boring. Let's add some massive concussions to the mix.
He took the chaotic, fatalistic thrill of his native Scottish game and integrated it into the structured, goal-oriented marsh game. It is a perfect cross-pollination of sporting mechanics.
And isn't it incredible that our most vital historical record of this beloved sport exists only because a grumpy neighbor's cabbages were crushed?
It really is a great twist of fate.
But after Gertie Kettle's diary, the game practically vanishes from the historical record for an entire century, right?
It does. We have to jump forward to the 12th century to see how this local marsh game metastasized.
Okay.
This time, our primary source is a letter from a wizard named Goodwin Neen, living in Yorkshire, writing to his Norwegian cousin Olaf.
So the game has migrated from a single marsh all the way up to Yorkshire.
Yes.
And the terminology is rapidly solidifying. Goodwin calls the game Quidditch, spelled Kwidditch. He casually mentions that his wife, Gunhilda, is going to play as a catcher, which is obviously the precursor to the chaser.
Exactly.
And the heavy flying rocks are now officially called bludders.
The phonetic shift from Quidditch to Quidditch and the formalization of positions like the catcher indicate a sport that is rapidly establishing its own institutional culture and jargon.
It's becoming a real thing.
But Mean's letter also reveals how they were adapting to the physical dangers. He tells Olaf about a match where a player named Rodolph the Blacksmith got a bludder on the head because old Ugga wasn't quick enough with his club.
So we know the rocks are actively homing in on people's skulls, and players, specifically beaters, though he doesn't use that term yet, are now explicitly carrying heavy wooden clubs to fend them off.
The game had to evolve countermeasures. If you introduce flying rocks designed to unseat players, you fundamentally require a designated protector armed with a weapon.
Right.
Neen also notes a critical change to the pitch itself. The new scoring barrels worked well, 3 at each end on stilts.
So we've evolved from Gertie Kettle's trees to barrels on stilts. We have catchers passing a quaffle. We have beaters using clubs to deflect bludders. The mechanical skeleton of modern Quidditch is entirely visible.
It is visible, yes. But as Wisp notes, it fundamentally lacked its most famous, its most defining, and its most game-ending element.
The snitch.
The fourth ball did not exist yet.
And when it finally did enter the game, it wasn't due to a brilliant flash of tactical design. It was the result of a horrific display of animal cruelty that completely hijacked the sport.
To understand how the Golden Snitch came to be, we first have to understand the cultural obsession with the Golden Snidget.
Okay, set the scene for us.
Long before they had any connection to Quidditch, hunting the Golden Snidget was a massively popular prestige pastime in the 12th century.
Now, the Golden Snidget is a tiny, entirely round bird with a long, thin beak and brilliant, jewel-like red eyes, right?
Yes. Today, it is a heavily protected endangered species. But back then, they were common, and they were hunted relentlessly, precisely because they were so agonizingly difficult to catch.
Because they're fast.
They're incredibly agile, capable of changing direction with lightning speed, and they are masters of evading Muggle detection. Catching one was a major status symbol.
And Wisp references a 12th century tapestry that depicts a Snidget hunt. It shows wizards using nets and wands, but it also explicitly depicts the gruesome reality of catching them by hand.
Right. The tiny, fragile bird was often crushed to death by the captor in the desperate attempt to secure it.
Which is awful. Wisp states clearly that every right-minded modern wizard deplores the destruction of these birds. But at the time, it was a cultural craze.
It was.
And in the year 1269, this bloody craze violently collided with the sport of Quidditch.
The collision occurred during a match attended by Barbarous Bragg, who was the chief of the Wizards' Council, essentially the highest political authority in the magical government at the time.
So imagine the scene. You have a standard game of Quidditch underway. Chasers are throwing the ball. Beaters are swinging clubs. And Barbarous Bragg, this immense political figure, arrives at the pitch carrying a caged Snidget.
Right.
He interrupts the match, opens the cage, and announces to the players that he will personally award 150 galleons to whichever player catches the bird during the course of the game.
And Wisp notes that 150 galleons in 1269 is equivalent to over 1 million galleons today. Bragg leveraged a fortune to completely disrupt the established rules of a sport, purely for his own sadistic amusement.
We know the exact fallout of this decision, thanks to an eyewitness account from a witch named Madame Modesty Rabnaught of Kent, who wrote a furious letter to her sister Prudence.
Modesty Rabnaught is fantastic.
She is my new historical hero. She describes the absolute chaos. She writes, "The players rose as one into the air, ignoring the quaffle and dodging the bludders. Both keepers abandoned the goal baskets and joined the hunt."
The entire game ceased to function. Every single player just started chasing this tiny bird for the 1 million galleon prize.
So Modesty Rabnaught, possessing a strong moral compass and clearly a very quick temper, decided to intervene.
Yes, she did.
She ran onto the pitch and shouted at the chief of the Wizards' Council, "This is not sport. Let the Snidget go free and let us watch the noble game of Quidditch, which we have all come to see."
But the crowd, whipped into a frenzy by the money, just laughed at her. Bragg actually threw the empty birdcage at her head.
Unbelievable.
So Modesty took matters into her own hands. When the terrified Snidget flew near her, she performed a flawless summoning charm. Because she wasn't flying on a broom, it was a clean catch.
She stuffed the bird down the front of her robes and ran for her life.
A remarkably brave action. She defied the highest political authority in the land and an angry mob of athletes and spectators.
They caught her, of course. Bragg was apoplectic. He fined her 10 galleons for disrupting the game, which was a massive sum for an average person.
Yeah, she mentioned she had to sell her home to pay the fine and is moving in with her sister.
But she saved the bird. Now look at what Bragg did to the sport. It's like someone showing up to a modern soccer match, walking onto the field, releasing a highly endangered glowing hummingbird, and offering $1 billion to whichever player can crush it in their hands.
It's completely absurd.
It completely derailed the actual sport.
Well, I would actually argue that while it derailed that specific match, Bragg's abhorrent cruelty inadvertently saved and professionalized the sport of Quidditch in the long run.
Wait, saved it? How does injecting animal cruelty save a sport?
Think about the economics of the spectacle. Before Bragg, Quidditch was a rough, localized game. But the introduction of the Snidget and the massive point swing it eventually represented added a level of high-stakes, individual heroism that captivated the masses.
Oh, I see.
Modesty Rabnot saved one bird, but Bragg's idea took root like wildfire. The concept of releasing a Snidget during a match became institutionalized. Without that massive surge in crowd appeal and economic injection, Quidditch might have remained a swamp game.
That is a dark but incredibly compelling point.
The cruelty was abhorrent, yes,
Yeah.
but it was the catalyst for the sport's massive expansion.
So they added a specific player to each team, originally called the hunter, whose sole job was to catch the bird.
Right.
And when the bird was caught and usually killed, the game ended, and the hunter's team was awarded an extra 150 points, specifically in memory of the 150 galleons Bragg had originally offered.
And this bloody practice continued for decades. But predictably, the constant institutionalized hunting decimated the golden Snidget population.
Right, they almost went extinct.
By the middle of the following century, the numbers had fallen so dangerously low that the Wizards' Council was forced to intervene.
Thankfully, the council was now headed by Elfrida Klagg, who was considerably more enlightened than Barbarous Bragg.
Much more.
She outlawed the killing and use of Snidgets in Quidditch entirely. She classified them as a protected species and founded the Modesty Rabnot Snidget Reservation in Somerset.
A fitting bureaucratic shift from blood sport to conservation. But, this absolute ban presented a massive structural problem for Quidditch.
Because the game relied on it.
Exactly. The capture of the Snidget had become the central climactic mechanic of the game. Teams frantically sought a substitute bird, but no other creature replicated the specific, erratic, lightning-fast flight patterns of the Snidget.
Which ushers in the era of magical engineering. Enter Bowman Wright of Godric's Hollow.
Bowman Wright.
He was an incredibly skilled metal charmer, and he took on the complex task of creating an artificial substitute.
Wisp notes that Wright left behind extensive rolls of parchment detailing massive orders from all over the country.
Showing the demand?
Yes, which shows just how desperate the Quidditch community was for a solution to save their game. And Wright's invention was a masterpiece of magical engineering.
He created the Golden Snitch.
The Snitch.
It is a perfect mechanical and magical replica of the biological Snidget. It's a walnut-sized ball, exactly the weight of the bird. It features silvery wings with rotational joints, allowing it to change direction with the exact precision of the living model.
But Wright added one crucial, game-changing enhancement that the live bird obviously lacked.
Right.
The Golden Snitch was bewitched to remain strictly within the boundaries of the Quidditch pitch.
Which is brilliant, because a live bird could easily fly 5 miles away into a forest, dragging the entire game with it.
Exactly. The boundary charm formalized the hunt. Wisp states that the introduction of the Golden Snitch finished the evolutionary process, begun 300 years prior on Quidditch Marsh.
So you have the Quaffle for territorial scoring, the Bludgers for chaos and defense, and the Snitch for the ultimate game-ending victory.
The core mechanical elements were finally locked in place. But as the sport's popularity exploded across the country, it created a massive existential crisis for the wizarding community as a whole.
Right.
A logistical nightmare of unprecedented proportions.
Because it's one thing to play a secretive game of catch in a swamp in the 11th century. But think about your local Muggle sports stadium. Now imagine trying to hide a 500-foot-long oval pitch and 14 athletes flying at breakneck speeds, hitting iron balls with clubs from the local non-magical government.
It's impossible.
How do you even begin to conceal that level of activity?
Initially, you don't, and that was the severe problem. Early attempts at secrecy were largely voluntary and almost universally ignored.
People just played wherever.
Yeah. Wisp cites Zacharias Mumps, writing in 1398, who gave the first full description of the game. Mumps heavily emphasized the vital need for anti-Muggle security.
He advised choosing deserted moorlands, setting up Muggle-repelling charms, and playing at night.
Sound advice. But apparently wizards are terrible at following security protocols, because the Wizards Council had to start passing increasingly draconian legal bans.
Right. In 1362, it was made illegal to play within 50 miles of towns. By 1368, they amended it to 100 miles.
And by 1419, the council was so utterly fed up with the lack of compliance that they issued a famously furious decree.
I love this decree.
It stated Quidditch should not be played, quote, anywhere near any place where there is the slightest chance that a Muggle might be watching, or will see how well you can play whilst chained to a dungeon wall.
The explicit threat of dungeon chaining suggests the authorities were completely losing control of the situation.
The situation reached an absolute breaking point with the International Statute of Wizarding Secrecy in 1692.
The big one.
This landmark legislation made every Ministry of Magic globally responsible for hiding magical sports within their territories. In Britain, this necessitated the creation of the Department of Magical Games and Sports.
And this department acted with an iron fist. They forced any Quidditch teams that flouted the security guidelines to disband immediately.
Immediate disbandment.
Wisp details the incredibly stupid cautionary tale of the Bantry Bangers.
The Bangers.
This was a Scottish team, apparently known much more for their raucous post-match parties than their actual tactical skills.
Yes, their absolute lack of discipline proved fatal to their existence. After a match in 1814 against the Appleby Arrows, the Bangers not only let their bludgers zoom away into the night sky, which is a massive security breach, but they also set out to capture a Hebridean black dragon to use as a team mascot.
They were flying over Inverness trying to wrangle a live, fire-breathing dragon.
In the middle of the night.
Ministry representatives apprehended them mid-flight, and the Banter Bangers were erased from the league. They never played again.
It shows how absolute the commitment to secrecy had to be. Modern teams don't just build a pitch in their backyard. They travel to highly secure, enchanted moorlands set up by the department.
So, with the locations strictly locked down and standardized by the ministry, the sport itself underwent a massive standardization of its equipment.
A true arms race of balls and baskets.
Let's trace this evolution. We know from Gertie Kettle they started with trees. Then Goodwin Neen mentioned barrels on stilts.
Right.
By Zacharias Mumps' time in the 14th century, the pitch was a formalized oval shape, and the goals were large baskets on poles.
Those baskets remained the standard for centuries, getting progressively smaller and higher as the athletes became more skilled. But in 1883, a monumental, highly controversial shift occurred.
The department decided to ban the baskets entirely and replace them with the standardized goalposts we see today.
And the wizarding public absolutely lost their minds.
They really did. Wisp includes a clipping from the Daily Prophet with the headline, "Bring back our baskets."
A departmental representative tried to rationally explain that baskets came in too many different sizes, and it was deeply unfair if one team had tiny baskets and another team had massive wicker caves.
Right, for competitive fairness.
But the fans didn't care about competitive fairness. They cared about tradition and chaos.
The Daily Prophet quoted a furious fan who said, "It won't be the same without baskets. I remember when I were a lad, we used to set fire to 'em for a laugh during the match. You can't do that with goal hoops. Half the fun's gone."
We used to set fire to them for a laugh. Setting the actual scoring apparatus on fire mid-game was considered a standard part of the fan experience.
It really highlights how deeply chaotic the culture was. The article notes the department rep was forced to retreat as the crowd threw a literal hail of baskets at him.
Despite the violent riots, the goal hoops stayed.
Thankfully.
Concurrently, the quaffle was evolving to meet the demands of faster flight. We know the original was stitched leather, sometimes featuring a strap or finger holes so players could hold it while maneuvering.
But the modern quaffle is a seamless 12-inch sphere. And interestingly, it was originally just brown leather until 1711 when they played a game in a torrential downpour.
Right, the mud.
Whenever the ball dropped in the mud, no one could find it, so they dyed it scarlet.
A simple, highly practical visual change. But the most significant magical alteration of the quaffle came shortly after, courtesy of a witch named Daisy Pennifold.
Because chasers were getting incredibly irritated having to dive continuously to the ground to retrieve the ball every single time someone missed a catch.
It ruined the momentum of an airborne game.
So Daisy Pennifold had a stroke of genius. She bewitched the quaffle so that if it is dropped, it falls slowly earthwards, exactly as if it were sinking through water.
It's an incredibly elegant solution to a mechanical problem. It allows chasers to swoop down and grab the ball in midair, keeping the pace of the game fast and airborne.
They still use the Pennifold quaffle today. And in 1875, the discovery of gripping charms eliminated the need for straps or finger holes entirely, allowing chasers a secure one-handed grip on a perfectly smooth sphere.
So the quaffle became highly engineered for ease of use. The bludgers, on the other hand, went through a much more violently problematic evolution.
Oh, definitely.
As we established, they started as literal flying rocks. Then they progressed to rocks carved into the shape of balls.
But rock has a fatal mechanical flaw in a game involving reinforced wooden bats. They crack.
Exactly. A cracked rock bludger results in flying gravel actively pursuing players for the rest of the match, which is highly distracting and severely damages the eyes.
To solve the cracking problem, teams in the early 16th century started experimenting with metal. Agatha Chubb, an expert in ancient artifacts, identified 12 lead bludgers from this period found preserved in peat bogs.
But lead proved to be a disastrous, highly dangerous choice. Lead is simply too soft a metal.
Right. Agatha Chubb noted that these lead bludgers had the faint, undeniable indentations of beaters' bats visible on them.
Which ruins the physics.
Exactly. If you dent a lead ball, it's not perfectly round anymore. Its aerodynamic properties are completely ruined. It will not fly straight. If you have an unpredictably flying heavy metal ball zooming around, isn't that just a return to the chaotic fatality of creation?
It absolutely is.
Yep.
An indented bludger would catch the wind unevenly. It would veer drastically off course, missing its intended target, and potentially hitting a completely unaware player in the back of the head.
So dangerous.
It was an unacceptable, unpredictable risk. Thus, the swift transition to iron. Nowadays, all bludgers are 10-inch iron spheres.
Yeah.
They don't crack, they don't dent under normal conditions, and they fly aerodynamically true.
Thank goodness for iron. But this brings us to a massive critical junction. Let's look at the reality of the pitch now. You have unbreakable iron cannonballs. You have perfectly frictionless aerodynamic racing brooms. You have athletes flying at breakneck speeds trying to throw a magically slowed ball through hoops, all while searching for a tiny, lightning-fast golden walnut.
It's intense.
You don't just have a sport anymore. You have a high-altitude combat zone. And that physical reality forced the ministry to enact the most draconian rulebook in sports history.
The rules had to become incredibly strict. And more importantly, the catalog of illegal fouls had to be comprehensive enough to cover magic.
Let's briefly outline how the positions finalized to deal with this environment. You have the keepers, whose roles shifted significantly over time.
Right. Originally, they performed like chasers and roamed the entire pitch, but by 1620, their role was simplified to focus on defense. They were advised to remain within the scoring area and guard the hoops.
Then you have the beaters. Wisp emphasizes that this position requires immense physical strength to repeatedly repel solid iron bludgers.
But more than that, it requires an exceptional sense of balance, because sometimes a beater has to take both hands off their broom for a double-handed assault on a bludger, relying entirely on their core and legs to stay airborne.
Then the chasers, the oldest position, dedicated entirely to passing the quaffle and scoring. And finally, the seekers.
The seekers, usually the lightest and fastest flyers.
They need a razor-sharp eye and the ability to fly one-handed or no-handed while diving. And Wisp notes a grim reality. While the seeker carries all the glamour, they are also the players who almost universally receive the worst injuries.
It's a tactical reality. Brutus Scrimger's book, The Beater's Bible, lists take out the seeker as its very first rule. They were the ultimate game-ending target on the pitch.
And as the position specialized and the stakes rose, the rules had to adapt to protect the players from highly aggressive tactics. A prime example is the stooging penalty introduced in 1884.
This is a fascinating look at legislative reaction to physical brutality. Prior to 1884, a common offensive tactic was for two chasers to enter the scoring area and physically beat up the keeper, literally ramming him aside, while the third chaser leisurely scored through the undefended hoop.
Which seems wildly unfair and incredibly dangerous for the keeper.
Oh, completely.
So the department introduced a rule stating only the chaser carrying the quaffle could enter the scoring area. And just like with the goalposts, the public reaction was furious.
The Daily Prophet ran the headline, "Our chasers aren't cheating."
The department had to issue statements explaining they were simply trying to eliminate severe keeper injuries. But the fans were having absolutely none of it.
It is a culture built on the expectation of rough, unimpeded physical contact.
The quote Wisp includes here is amazing. It's from a, quote, freckle-faced 6-year-old leaving the hall in tears. He says, "I loved Stubing. Me and me dad like watching them keepers flattened. I don't want to go to Quidditch no more."
Think about that. A 6-year-old child crying because the new rules mean he can't watch a grown man get trampled in midair.
Wizarding sports culture is incredibly unyieldingly tough.
Which is exactly why the Department of Magical Games and Sports eventually had to compile a list of 700 recognized Quidditch fouls.
700. And the historical event that generated this list is mind-boggling. Wisp reveals that all 700 of these fouls were committed in a single catastrophic match.
The final of the first ever World Cup in 1473 between Transylvania and Flanders.
The 1473 World Cup is a dark, almost mythological legend in Quidditch history.
Wisp notes that the full unredacted list of these 700 fouls has never been made available to the wizarding public. The department keeps it highly classified, specifically because they are afraid that witches and wizards who see the list might get ideas.
And based on the few fouls Wisp does explicitly mention from that game, the department is entirely justified in hiding the list.
Oh, absolutely.
He mentions the transfiguration of a chaser into a polecat. He mentions the attempted decapitation of a keeper with a broadsword.
A broadsword.
And my personal favorite, the release from under the robes of the Transylvanian captain of 100 blood-sucking vampire bats.
The introduction of broadswords and vampire bats moves us far past sporting infractions and squarely into premeditated assault and dark magic.
For sure.
This reveals something profound about magical society. When you have access to literal reality-bending magic, the temptation to use it under high stress is overwhelming. The 700 fouls aren't just a sports rule book. They're a comprehensive behavioral psychology study of wizards pushed to their absolute limits.
Wisp notes that 90% of the fouls listed are essentially impossible as long as the ban on using wands against the opposing team is upheld. That ban was imposed in 1538, likely in direct response to the lingering trauma of events like the 1473 final.
It makes sense.
He mentions some of the other technically impossible fouls, like setting fire to an opponent's broom tail or attacking an opponent with an axe. But even with wands banned, modern players still find highly creative ways to break the rules.
The 10 common fouls Wisp lists reflect centuries of codified, non-magical misbehavior.
The terminology alone is fantastic. You have blagging, which is seizing the opponent's broom tail to physically drag them back. Blatching, which is flying with the explicit intent to aggressively collide. Cobbing, which is the excessive use of elbows.
Some are highly positional. Flacking is when a keeper sticks any portion of their anatomy through the goal hoop to punch the quaffle out, essentially defending the goal from behind. Haversacking is when a chaser's hand is still on the quaffle as it goes through the hoop. It must be cleanly thrown.
But look at some of these others. Bumping is an offense by beaters, where they deliberately hit a bludger into the crowd of spectators.
That's just mean.
Wisp notes this forces a halt to the game as officials rush up to protect bystanders, and unscrupulous players use this manufactured chaos to prevent an opposing chaser from scoring.
Or quaffle poking, which is tampering with the quaffle itself, like puncturing it so it falls more quickly, or in erratic zigzags.
Does the fact that these are considered common fouls tell us that Quidditch players are inherently devious, or just incredibly creative problem solvers under immense pressure?
I'd lean toward the latter. When the stakes are high, athletes in any sport will seek an edge. In Quidditch, where the environment is three-dimensional and the physical variables are so immense, the opportunities for creative tactical rule-breaking are exponentially higher.
Right.
Puncturing the quaffle or causing a calculated distraction in the crowd requires a highly devious presence of mind.
which makes the job of the referee incredibly difficult and historically incredibly lethal. How does a referee enforce rules without escalating the situation into magical combat?
Wisp highlights the severe plight of the referee, noting that officiating a match was once a task for only the bravest witches and wizards.
He cites Zacharias Mumps again, who documents the story of a Norfolk referee named Cyprian Udall. Udall actually died during a friendly match in 1357.
And the originator of the fatal curse was never definitively caught, but they were strongly believed to be a member of the crowd who just disagreed with a call.
While there haven't been proven referee slayings recently, Wisp points out the modern danger is subtle broom tampering.
Yeah, this is terrifying.
He mentions incidents where a referee's broom is transformed into a portkey. So halfway through the match, while trying to call a penalty, the ref is suddenly whisked away through space and turns up months later, completely disoriented, in the Sahara Desert.
It emphasizes that the referee isn't just managing the 14 highly aggressive players. They have to maintain absolute vigilance over the entire surrounding environment and the thousands of fans.
It's a huge job.
Modern referees in Britain undergo rigorous flying tests and exacting written examinations. They must definitively prove they will not jinx offensive players even under severe pressure. Given the behavior of the players and the fans, that requires a monumental test of restraint.
So with the rules strictly enforced, the equipment universally standardized, and the referees heavily armored against portkey hijacking, the sport was finally ready for true, organized professionalization.
Yes, and that forces a massive shift in how the sport operates, introducing the intense, deeply tribal, and highly historical world of the British and Irish Quidditch League.
The league.
The professionalization of the sport wasn't just a natural evolution. It was essentially mandated by the ministry's need to control the secrecy of the game. In 1674, the league was officially established.
The Department of Magical Games and Sports evaluated every team in the country and selected the 13 best to join the league.
And what happened to all the other local teams?
They were ordered to disband immediately.
Just like that. You're not in the top 13, shut it down.
Imagine the localized economic devastation of disbanding hundreds of beloved local teams overnight. It's a brutal consolidation of talent and capital.
But those remaining 13 teams have been competing for the League Cup every year since. WISP provides a deep dive into several key teams, giving us a taste of their distinct cultures and the sociology of sports fandom in a magical society.
Let's look at the undisputed gold standard, the Montrose Magpies.
The Magpies are the dynasty team. They are the most successful franchise in the history of the British and Irish League, boasting 32 league wins and 2 European Champions victories.
They wear black and white robes with a magpie emblem. They represent peak athletic achievement and have a global fan base.
But on the exact opposite end of the spectrum of success, you have the Chudley Cannons.
Oh, the Cannons. And this is where the economics and psychology of fandom get really interesting.
The Cannons are a fascinating study in persistent, almost tragic loyalty. WISP states their glory days may be considered by many to be completely over.
They won the league 21 times, but their last victory was in 1892. Their performance over the last century has been, in his polite words, lackluster.
How does a team survive economically in a professional league for over a century without winning a championship?
I have no idea. What truly cements their identity is how their lack of success is reflected in their very branding. They wear bright orange robes emblazoned with a speeding cannonball, but it's their motto that tells the real story.
Their original club motto was, "We shall conquer," a standard aggressive sports motto.
But in 1972, after 8 decades of unmitigated failure, they officially changed the motto to, "Let's all just keep our fingers crossed and hope for the best."
It is a stunning, almost unbelievable admission of defeat institutionalized into their corporate identity. But from a sociological perspective, it's brilliant.
They aren't selling victory anymore. They were selling camaraderie in the face of despair. They are merchandising hope.
The Chudley Cannons sound like every cursed sports franchise in Muggle history rolled into one. You don't choose to be a Cannons fan. You inherit the suffering from your parents. It's a generational burden.
But moving from the tragic to the legendary, we have to look at the Holyhead Harpies. Founded in 1203, they are entirely unique among Quidditch teams worldwide because they have only ever hired witches. No wizards are allowed on the team.
And they are responsible for what WISP categorizes as one of the finest Quidditch games ever played. A legendary, grueling match in 1953 against the Heidelberg Harriers.
The Heidelberg Harriers were a massively formidable German team, famously described by an opposing captain as being fiercer than a dragon and twice as clever. So this was an absolute clash of titans.
The match was fought continuously over a 7-day period, 7 days of non-stop, high-altitude athletic exertion.
It finally concluded with a spectacular snitch capture by the harpy seeker Glynis Griffiths.
But the post-match event is almost more famous than the game itself. The Harriers captain, Rudolf Brand, was so deeply moved by the magnificent athletic performance that he immediately dismounted his broom at the end of the match and proposed marriage to his opposite number, the Harpies captain, Gwendolyn Morgan.
And how did Gwendolyn respond to this grand romantic gesture after a grueling 7-day battle?
She concussed him with her Clean Sweep 5 broomstick, just smacked him right in the head.
It is the most flawlessly on-brand Quidditch ending possible. Romance takes a backseat to physical dominance. Speaking of fierce, Wisp also details the Appleby arrows, founded in 1612. They wear pale blue robes with a silver arrow.
And they possess one of the most terrifying fan traditions in the history of sports. Their supporters used to celebrate by shooting actual arrows into the air from their wands every time their chasers scored.
A tradition that is visibly spectacular, yes, but unbelievably reckless. It was finally banned by the department in 1894. Why? Because during a match, one of these celebratory arrows plummeted down and pierced the referee, Nugent Potts, straight through the nose. Again, the poor referees bear the brunt of everything.
The arrows also harbor a fierce, deeply traditional rivalry with the Wimborne Wasps.
And the origin of the Wasps' name is a perfect example of mid-match improvisation turning into institutional history. Wisp explains they were founded in 1312, wearing horizontally striped yellow and black robes. But they acquired their name from an incident in the mid-17th century during a highly contested match against the Arrows.
A wasp speeder was flying past a tree on the edge of the pitch. This was before pitches were entirely cleared of environmental obstacles, and noticed a massive, active wasp's nest. He batted the nest directly toward the arrow's seeker.
He used a live, swarming wasp's nest as an improvised bludger. The arrow seeker was so badly stung he had to completely retire from the game. Wimborne won the match, and they adopted the wasp as their lucky emblem. Their fans, known as the Stingers, still buzz loudly to distract opposing chasers taking penalties. It's literal biological warfare adapted for sports fandom.
It perfectly demonstrates how deeply the chaotic history and lore of the early games are ingrained in the identity of modern teams.
So we have this rich, violent, deeply tribal league system established in Britain and Ireland. But Quidditch couldn't be contained to the islands. While Europe embraced the game, it exploded globally in very different ways, which reveals a lot about the cultures that adopted it.
Wisp traces the spread into Europe by the early 15th century. We know Norway was an early convert, highly likely thanks to Goodwin Nien's cousin Olaf. Wisp quotes a verse by a Norwegian poet, Ingolf the Iambic, from the early 1400s, celebrating the visceral thrill of the chase and the physical sting of the bludger.
In France, you have the Quiberon quaffle punchers, famed for their flamboyant style of play and their shocking pink robes. In Bulgaria, you have the Vratsa vultures. Wisp notes they are pioneers of the long goal. They execute a tactic where chasers shoot the quaffle from well outside the standard scoring area, relying on extreme velocity to beat the keeper. That tactic alone has won them 7 European Cups.
And beyond Europe, the game took root in incredibly diverse territories. New Zealand was introduced to the game in the 17th century by European herbologists on expedition. Their leading team is the Mutahora Macaws, who famously have a live red, yellow, and blue phoenix mascot named Sparky.
Africa is noted as a continent with rapidly surging Quidditch popularity. Uganda, in particular, is an emerging global powerhouse. Their most notable club, the Patanga Proudsticks, actually held the legendary Montrose Magpies to a draw in 1986, an event that completely astonished the European-centric Quidditch-playing world. 6 Proudstick players recently represented Uganda in the World Cup.
Asia, however, presents a distinctly different narrative. Wisp notes that Quidditch has never achieved great popularity in the East. The flying broomstick is considered a bizarre rarity in countries where the flying carpet is still the preferred and highly flourishing mode of travel. The ministries of magic in India, Pakistan, Bangladesh, Iran, and Mongolia view Quidditch with significant cultural suspicion.
Though Japan is a notable exception, the Toyohashi Tengu narrowly missed a win over Lithuania's Gordok Gargoyles in 1994. But they have this incredibly intense cultural practice of ceremonially setting fire to their own brooms in the event of a defeat, a practice which the International Confederation of Wizards officially frowns upon as a massive waste of good wood.
It's fascinating how local cultural practices immediately intersect with the adoption of a foreign sport. But nowhere is this intersection more striking or more destructive than in North America.
The American Anomaly. This is my absolute favorite historical detour in the entire book. Why didn't America dominate Quidditch the way they dominate so many Muggle sports? Because, as the history shows, they looked at the game and decided they would rather just blow things up instead.
The story centers on an 18th century wizard named Abraham Peasgood. He traveled from Europe to America, bringing a quaffle with him in his trunk, fully intending to recruit a Quidditch team and spread the game in the New World.
But something goes catastrophically wrong in transit.
During the long sea journey, the tip of Peasgood's wand inadvertently came into contact with the leather quaffle inside his trunk. It cast an unknown, highly volatile enchantment on the ball.
So Peasgood arrives in America, gets an eager group together, explains the rules, and throws the ball around. And when he finally catches a pass, the quaffle explodes directly in his face.
Now, a logical, sports-minded person might have immediately tried to reverse the spell or simply procured a new, unenchanted quaffle. But Peasgood, whose sense of humor Wisp describes as robust, found the explosion utterly delightful.
He abandoned every single thought of Quidditch and invented an entirely new game based entirely around the explosive properties of the ball. He called it Quadpot.
The rules of Quadpot are a fascinating distillation of the American approach to magical sports. There are 11 players aside. They throw the modified quaffle, now officially called the quad, from team member to team member. The singular objective is to get the quad into the pot, a small cauldron situated at the end of the pitch containing a solution that neutralizes the explosion before it blows up.
And if it explodes while you are holding it, you are disqualified and have to leave the pitch. It is essentially a high-speed, airborne game of hot potato with a literal timed bomb.
If the quad is safely deposited in the pot, the scoring team gets a point and a fresh quad is brought onto the pitch. Quadpot became wildly successful in the United States, completely eclipsing Quidditch for centuries.
Is Quadpot the ultimate reflection of the American spirit in the wizarding world? They looked at a complex, elegant sport like Quidditch, with its specific positions and strategic intricacies, had their ball accidentally explode and said, you know what, this is better, let's just toss a live bomb around. It is aggressive, fast-paced, structurally simpler, and incredibly loud.
It certainly speaks to a very different sporting sensibility, one that prioritizes immediate, explosive spectacle over long-term strategic endurance. However, Wisp does note that Quidditch is finally gaining serious traction in the United States. 2 American teams have recently broken through internationally. The Sweetwater All-Stars from Texas, who defeated the Quiberon Quaffle Punchers in a thrilling 5-day match in 1993, and the Fitchburg Finches from Massachusetts.
So Quidditch is finally conquering the last major geographical holdout. But none of this global domination, the multi-day matches, the extreme long-distance goals of the Vultures, the sheer blistering speed of modern play, none of it would be mechanically possible without one final piece of the puzzle: the massive technological evolution of the racing broom.
Wisp briefly caps off the historical timeline by reminding us that until the early 19th century, Quidditch was still played on everyday household brooms. The major technological turning point was the invention of the cushioning charm by Elliot Smethwick in 1820.
Finally ending the horrific era of splinter-filled buttocks and exquisite discomfort.
Indeed, it made long-duration broom flight vastly more comfortable. But it wasn't until 1879 that the first true, dedicated racing broom was created. The Oakshaft 79, meticulously crafted by Elias Grimstone of Portsmouth.
It featured a very thick oaken handle designed specifically for endurance flying and withstanding high-altitude winds. The broom technology finally caught up to the intense athletic demands of the sport, allowing Quidditch to truly become the high-speed, global spectacle we know today.
It provided the aerodynamic and structural foundation for the modern globe-spanning World Cups.
We've covered an immense amount of ground today in this deep dive. We've traced the incredible, violent evolution of this sport. We started with warlocks suffering on raw ash branches in the 10th century. We examined the brutal, fatal cauldron-catching mechanics of creothetation in Scotland. We read the irritated diary entries of Gertie Kettle as the game took its first clumsy, goal-oriented steps in a marsh. We saw the chaotic era of life snidget hunting, the ingenious engineering of the golden snitch by Bowman Wright, and the massive, government-mandated logistical efforts to hide the game from muggles, culminating in the standardized rules and unbreakable iron bludgers we see today. It is a history of violence, creativity, intense stubbornness, and an unyielding, deeply human desire to fly fast and hit things.
It is exactly that. But look closely at the broader trajectory we've just discussed. Consider the societal evolution from a game like Creo, where the entire point was essentially a fatalistic test of surviving falling boulders, to the highly structured reality of modern Quidditch. Modern Quidditch requires intricate, specialized teamwork. It operates under a highly regulated set of rules enforced by an entire bureaucratic arm of the Ministry of Magic. And it eventually necessitated the deliberate legal protection of an endangered species like the Snidget. The question we are left with is this. Does the evolution of a society's sports mirror its moral and cultural progress? When you look at the complex, deeply regulated rulebook of modern Quidditch, you aren't just looking at the rules of a game. You're looking at a living document that tracks the slow, painful, but undeniable civilizing of the wizarding world itself. It is a thought worth considering the next time you see a seeker diving for the snitch, knowing they are chasing an engineered marvel rather than a fragile bird, in a game that has learned, over centuries of trial and error, to balance the thrill of danger with the value of life.
Thank you for taking this deep dive with us today. Keep an eye on the sky, and we'll catch you next time.